It's still August 31st, right? Yeah. 2014. And now we are at the procedure of registration. I thought people had to register before the class. Okay. Okay, so this is section number 17. Yeah, I said that is a pretty, technical and minute. You could read it on your own, but yeah, 15 and 16 I skipped over. Well, 16 is just the summary of 15. So we go to 17. Okay, and so it says that here, when an object is undesirable, the fivefold sense consciousness, reception, investigation, and registration that arise are unwholesome resultants. And when the object is desirable, these citas are wholesome resultants. If the object is extremely desirable, then investigation and registration are accompanied by joy. Okay, now this passage gives us something which is quite interesting about the citta viti, the cognitive process. You see, in the cognitive process we have, the 17 moments, but really the 14 moments beginning with five-door adverting. So we divide it into Now this phase, we call this the phase, I would just call it in a broad sense, the phase of reception of the object, is largely the result of past karma. The javana phase is where new karma is created. And the registration is also said to be the result of, maybe I should put past karma. Of course, the five-door adverting consciousness and the determining consciousness are not karma resultants. Those are just functional. But the actual sense consciousness, receiving, and investigating consciousness are karma resultants. Then comes the javana phase, in which we create new karma, and then the registration is another result of karma. And so the nature of the object determines whether that result of past karma is unwholesome resultant or wholesome resultant. So if the object is something that's considered undesirable, unpleasant, disagreeable, then it's unwholesome karma that's maturing in the form of the receiving, in the form of the sense consciousness, the receiving consciousness, and the investigating consciousness. If the object is something which is agreeable, pleasant, desirable, then the sense consciousness, the receiving consciousness, the investigating consciousness, and the registration consciousness are results of wholesome karma. And then if the object is extremely desirable, as it says, then investigation and registration are accompanied not by neutral feeling, but by that burst of joy, joyful feeling. Okay, so now it continues. In this connection too, at the end of functional jhavanas, accompanied by joy, there arise registration mind moments, also accompanied by joy. At the end of functional jhavanas, accompanied by equanimity, the registration mind moments are also accompanied by equanimity. So it seems that there's a difference here. Well, we'll come to this later for elaboration. But let's go to the guide. Okay, so the guide is explaining, and this is where some people might disagree, sometimes including the teacher himself, but it says that sense objects are distinguished into three classes: the undesirable, the moderately desirable, and the extremely desirable. And so while the desirable object is thus subdivided into two, all undesirable objects are comprised within the single class, which is called simply the undesirable. Yeah, this is where I find it a little problematic. According to the Abhidhamma philosophy, this distinction in the quality of objects pertains to the intrinsic or the inherent nature of the object itself. It is not determined by the individual temperament and preferences of the experiencer. So this commentary called Samoha Vinodini says that when a person considers a desirable object to be undesirable, or an undesirable object to be desirable, he does so due to a perversion or distortion of perception. The object itself, however, remains inherently desirable or undesirable, independently of the perceiver's personal preferences. So I remember my teacher explained to me that okay, when a dog, when we give the dog food, okay, we think of the dog food as undesirable. You know, we wouldn't want to eat the dog food. The dog goes running after it with a wagging tail, delighted to get the dog food, but the dog food is said to be intrinsically undesirable because we don't consider it desirable. But I think if the dogs were composing an Abhidhamma, and their master was a vegetarian eating tofu, and chingcai, the green vegetables. In their Abhidhamma, they would say that dog food is intrinsically desirable. And the tofu and the green vegetables are intrinsically undesirable. So anyway, this is what I said, a little bit anthropocentric. So then this Abhidhamma commentary, it states that the distinction between intrinsically desirable and undesirable obtains by way of the average being. Well, I think by being they mean a person, of course. Otherwise, if we take the average, there are so many more animals than human beings around. Probably more dogs than human beings on the planet. Okay, it says, it is distinguishable according to what is found desirable at one time and undesirable at another time by average. Here we put in brackets men, but I think it would be people such as accountants, government officials, burgesses. This would be like small town business people, landowners, and merchants. Well, at least I would hand it to them that since they were Buddhist monks who were composing these commentaries, they didn't use what's considered desirable and undesirable by Buddhist monks as their standard. That they took people, working at ordinary occupations. Okay, so when on a given occasion one experiences an undesirable, a moderately desirable, or an extremely desirable object, this is governed by one's past karma. And thus, this is important, the object experienced provides the opportunity for karma to ripen in the form of the resultant states of consciousness. And so the resultant chittas are the ripening of past karma, and those particular chittas are keyed to the nature of the object. So if the object is something which is disagreeable, unpleasant, it's triggering the arising of the results of unwholesome past karma. If the object is something which is agreeable, likable, it's triggering the results of past wholesome karma. So the resultant chittas accord with the nature of the object spontaneously, without any deliberation on our part. We don't have to plan, think, decide, but just the object by virtue of its own nature will set off these resultant chittas, just as a facial reflection in the mirror reflects the features of our own face. And so, going on, through the force of unwholesome karma, one encounters an undesirable object, and thus the resultant chittas in the cognitive process, are generated by the maturation of that unwholesome karma. So in this case, the sense consciousness, reception, investigation, and registration chittas are necessarily unwholesome resultants, the result of unwholesome karma. And the feeling that accompanies those chittas will be always the neutral feeling or equanimous feeling, except in the case of body consciousness, which is accompanied by painful feeling. Okay, then the converse case That is, when the object is simply desirable, of an ordinary kind, or very desirable object. This is encountered through the force of wholesome karma, and the resultant chittas in the cognitive process will be generated by the maturation of that wholesome karma. And so those chittas will be wholesome resultant chittas. So that is the four resultant positions: receiving, the sense consciousness, receiving, investigation, and registration. Those will be wholesome resultants. And they will generally be accompanied by equanimity, except bodily consciousness is accompanied by pleasure, and in the experience of an extremely desirable object, investigation and registration are accompanied by joy. Okay, now, the fact that the resulting chittas in the earlier phase of the cognitive process are either unwholesome resultants or wholesome resultants doesn't mean that the javana part of the process has to mirror the nature of the object and the resultant chittas. But actually, through training, it's possible to change the way we respond to the objects. So, for example, somebody meets with a lot of adversity in life because of the maturation of unwholesome karma. So they meet a lot of difficulty, we would say that these are unwholesome resultants that are occurring. But by training the mind, it's possible to transform the javanas. So instead of responding to the undesirable results with aversion, with sorrow, with displeasure, and getting bogged down in further unwholesome karma, it's possible to develop, say, equanimity towards that adversity, or even by launching out in a wholesome direction, one can generate a lot of joyful consciousness, so that one has, the strength to develop wholesome karma, which will bring its good results in the future. And similarly, when there is a lot of wholesome resultants, things which are considered agreeable and desirable, with an untrained mind, one latches onto them in the javana phase with greed and attachment, maybe with pride and conceit. And then, because of the good results, one starts becoming attached and generating a lot of unwholesome chittas. And so if one does that, then one is creating unwholesome karma, which will bring painful results in the future. But by developing the mind, then one could look at these desirable results with equanimity, or one could have a wholesome mind with joy, because one uses them for beneficial purposes. Okay, so we have like some people, say, who are very rich. Maybe this is happening through the maturation of past karma, and so they're living in, they undertake business, they succeed, because past karma is ripening, so they become very successful. Then they become the head of a corporation with $1 billion income, and then somebody will start, they just building more houses for themselves in different parts of the country, different countries, buying a private plane, a yacht, and just enjoying parties and living a somewhat debauched lifestyle. Okay, so in that way, because of their greed and attachment, then they're generating unwholesome karma. So they're having the good results of past karma, but now they're generating unwholesome karma in response. But somebody else who has that good fortune can think that I have this fortune not just to enjoy for myself, but I should do wholesome deeds that will be beneficial to others. And so then they start, using the wealth that they earn through their business to set up a charity. They might be helping unfortunate children. And so they use the wealth for good, worthy purposes. And this way they're creating more wholesome karma that will bring wholesome results in the future. Okay, now coming back to the text, now I'm at the top of page 173. When the object is undesirable, the function of registration is exercised exclusively by the unwholesome resultant investigating consciousness. Now we have to remember, as I said yesterday, that a single consciousness might perform several functions. So we call this consciousness, this type of consciousness, the investigating consciousness. But here it's not exercising the function of investigation. But if we look at, again, that sheet that I gave out, you see that the unwholesome resultant mind-conscious element associated with neutral feeling, that's the one almost at the bottom, one up from the bottom, that this is what we usually call the investigating consciousness, but it has 5 functions. The first 3 don't concern us here, but it has function 4 is investigating, function 5 is registration. So here it's exercising the function of registration. Okay, when the object is moderately desirable, then registration is, the function of registration is performed by the wholesome resultant investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity, or by one of the 4 great resultants. That's one of the 4 beautiful resultants accompanied by equanimity. And when the object is very desirable, then the function of registration is performed by either the investigating consciousness accompanied by joy, or by one of the 4 great resultants accompanied by joy. Okay, then the next paragraph, I explain what I just explained extemporaneously about how the javana can differ from the resultants. And then we have the bold heading, in this connection too, and it says that this passage is included to show that it is not only the resultant chittas that accord with the object, but also the arahat's functional sense sphere javanas. So when an arahat experiences an extremely desirable object, his javanas occur as one of the 4 functional chittas accompanied by joy, and his registration chittas are one of the 5 resultants accompanied by joy. That's the joyful investigating consciousness, or one of the beautiful resultants accompanied by joy. And when the arahat experiences an undesirable object, then the javanas occur accompanied by equanimity, and the registration chittas as one of the 6 resultants accompanied by equanimity. Let me just go over this again to myself. Okay, when the arhat experiences an undesirable or a desirable neutral object, the jhavanas occur accompanied by equanimity, and the registration citas as one of the 6 resultants accompanied by equanimity. So these 6 resultants would be the either of the 2 investigating consciousnesses, either accompanied by equanimity or accompanied by joy, or one of the 4 beautiful functional it's one of the 4 beautiful resultants. Though this doesn't quite make sense. The jhavanas occur accompanied by equanimity, that's clear. The registration citas as one of the 6 resultants accompanied by equanimity. Okay, one would be the investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity. I think it should be 5. I think that there's a mistake here. Unless somebody knows why I wrote 6. Of course, there would be 4 sense sphere resultants accompanied by equanimity, and the investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity. Oh, I see the point. Okay, I see the point now. I see it. It's a little confusing, the sentence. Excuse me? I can't hear. No. Because this is the registration citta. It's not talking about the jhana. This is when he experiences an undesirable, we should break it up. When he experiences an undesirable object, the jhavanas will occur accompanied by equanimity, and the registration citta will be the investigating consciousness, unwholesome resultant investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity. Then when he's experiencing a desirable neutral object, the jhavanas occur accompanied by equanimity, and the registration cittas will be either the wholesome resultant investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity, or one of the 4 beautiful resultants accompanied by equanimity. Got that? You see, the sentence is, it should have been divided into 2 sentences. Let us put it this way. Okay, so if it's an undesirable object, then the registration will have to be the unwholesome resultant. It's the investigating consciousness. Accompanied by equanimity. Because it's an undesirable object, so the registration consciousness is an unwholesome resultant, and the only unwholesome resultant that could experience it is the investigating consciousness accompanied by equanimity. Okay, if it's a moderately desirable object, then he could experience it. The registration consciousness will be a wholesome resultant, so it might be the wholesome resultant investigating, accompanied by equanimity, or it could be one of the four beautiful sense sphere resultants, which are wholesome resultants, accompanied by equanimity. So this sentence was a little, it should have been broken down into two sentences. Okay, I skipped over the section. When you have questions now, you could just note them and bring them up in the evening, because I want to just go quickly through the rest of this. So I'm skipping over. This is an interesting section on the adventitious bhavanga, but we don't have time to take it. But you could read it on your own. I found it of interest. Then the law of registration, they hold that registration occurs only at the end of sense sphere jhavanas, only to sense sphere beings, not to beings in the fine material and material realm, and only when sense sphere phenomena become objects. That is only in regard to things pertaining to the sense sphere, not to other objects. And then, of course, we know this already, that registration occurs in connection with clear objects in the mind door and very great objects at the five sense doors, when there is certainty as regards sense sphere jhavanas, beings, and objects. So let's go on to the procedure of jhavana. Okay, so the text explains that among the jhavanas, in a limited jhavana process, that's a jhavana process pertaining to the sense sphere, the sense sphere jhavanas run only for 7 or 6 times. But in the case of a feeble process, such as at the time of dying, and so forth, I think so forth would mean when fainting maybe, they run only 5 times. Then to the exalted one, that's to the Buddha, at the time of performing the twin miracle, and so forth, when the procedure is very rapid, only 4 or 5 occasions of reviewing consciousness occur, so they say, but we don't have to go into that in detail. Then the guide explains that in a sense sphere cognitive process, the general rule is for the jhavanas to run 7 times, though if the object is extremely weak, or probably better, relatively weak, they may run only 6 times. So that's a bit puzzling to me, because I've always learned that they run 7 times, except in a very weak process, like at the time of death. Okay, then in the last jhavana process preceding death, And then the commentaries say also at times like fainting, the javanas run only 5 times because of the weakness of the heart base or brain, whichever. Okay, then the javanas the javana in attainments. So it says here, the sublime javanas for a beginner, that's during the first cognitive process of absorption, the first time one achieves absorption. And for the direct knowledge, javanas always, we won't take the direct knowledge here, the sublime, that's the fine material sphere or the supramundane javanas. No, this is sublime. So this is the fine material sphere or the immaterial sphere. So the sublime javanas for a beginner during the first process of absorption run only once. So the first time one attains jhana, the jhana chitta occurs just once, and then there's the drop into the bhavanga. Okay, then we come to the arising of the 4 paths. So the paths endure each path for only 1 mind moment, then followed by 2 or 3 occasions of the fruition consciousness arise, according to the case, whether it's the average person or one with sharp faculties. Then comes the drop into the bhavanga. I'm going to skip over the next paragraph on the attainment of cessation. Okay, then just going down to the last paragraph here. In the cognitive process of attainments, as in the stream of the life continuum, there is no fixed procedure regarding the processes. It should be understood that many sublime and supramundane javanas take place in immediate succession. Okay, what this means is that after when the person first achieves jhana, the very first occasion, it's just 1 mind moment, whether it's any of the 5 jhanas or the 4 formless attainments. But after when a person has become more experienced with the jhana and gains some degree of mastery over it, then that jhanic consciousness can continue to occur many, many times in succession without a drop into the bhavanga. So as I said earlier, the person might make the determination, I'm going to sit in the first jhana, second jhana for an hour. Then they'll go into the jhana, and then from the moment they go into the jhana, through the whole duration of the hour, there'll just be 1 jhana chitta arising after another. It's not restricted to 7, but it can go on hundreds and thousands of jhana javana chittas, following until the hour is finished. When the hour is finished, then the person drops into the bhavanga and then comes out into the sense sphere consciousness. And similarly, with the fruition attainment, you see, with the attainment of the path and fruit, the meditator goes into the path, then there'll be 2 or 3 moments of fruition, then one comes out into the bhavanga. But after a person has gone through the path and fruit, if they want to enter into the fruition attainment, they make that determination. Say it's a stream enterer, he makes the determination, I'm going to enter into the fruition absorption of stream entry. And so he makes that determination. He makes the determination for 1 hour. So he'll sit down, direct his mind to the fruit. He enters into the fruition. Then for 1 hour, the fruition cittas will arise in unbroken succession. And in the fruition cittas, he's directly experiencing nirvana, nibbana, till he comes out, and then he goes back into his sense sphere consciousness. Okay, and that pretty much takes us through as far as I was planning to go with compendium of the cognitive process. There are some other sections, but we have to face our limitations of time. So I took what I think are the most important sections. Okay, so let us take, I think we have like a... Did we go directly into the meditation, or? Yeah, I think we have like a 5-minute break. So if you have to go to the restroom, you could do so.